Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. Great to have you here, and we've got a great session. So over the next minute or so, as people jump in, love to know where you're from. So right here on the right-hand side, there's a chat session. If you could just jump in and let us know where you are, that'd be great. In the meantime, like I say, we'll just maybe do a quick of an intro of myself and then tell you a little bit about what we hope to cover off today. So my name's Dave Mack, and I lead the e-commerce vertical for SCI. SCI is Canada's probably largest e-commerce 3PL, and we service customers all across Canada, as well as a lot of US brands. And we're really proud today to be teamed up with 6 Rivers, who does a lot of work with us around automation. And together, we've pulled together a really great sort of subject matter expertise that's going to talk about a really timely topic, which is North American e-commerce strategy. And why North American is an interesting sort of question. We all know that e-commerce in the US has grown and continues to grow and be accelerated with the impact of COVID, 2 or 3 years. But at the same time, we're seeing even more growth happen in Canada. So there's lots of different data points out there, but overall, you'd think it was about a 4 or 5 year acceleration on where e-commerce would be for Canada. And why is that as important? It's important because top leaders are no longer viewing US and Canada as 1 or 2 separate strategies. They're now looking at it as one strategy. And what we're going to share with you today are insights from 3 or 4 different perspectives on why is that so important, and how can you make the most of that as you go back to what you're leading in your organization, whether you're a e-commerce brand, e-commerce retailer, or a partner supporting those. So with that in mind, let me take you a little bit through what the agenda is going to look like. Thanks again. Love to see where everyone is calling in from. So the expert panel today is going to be made up of 6 of us in total. Really pleased to have all 5 of these folks with us, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Mamta is from Canada Post, and she's the director of Parcels and e-commerce enterprise marketing. And she's going to share with us some insights around not specifically just the Canadian consumer, but what does that Canadian US consumer look like? And why is that tie into North America? And you'll see she does a great job setting the stage for the next conversation, which will be Dwayne Johnson, who leads sales here at SCI on the e-commerce side, and one of the clients that recently has come on with SCI, which is Saysh, and Austin Cooper. We're really pleased to have him here with Saysh. The 2 of them are going to talk a little bit about why did Austin and Saysh decide when they brought that new brand to life to take a look at it from a North American perspective versus just US perspective. Some really great tips there and insights. Looking forward to what you're going to hear. You're also going to learn a bit more about who is Saysh. You may not be aware that the Olympian track star Allyson Felix, her new footwear and apparel brand is taking the market by storm, and that's that Saysh brand. That I don't want to take much thunder from Austin, but he'll do a great job sharing what Saysh is about, and I know that you'll probably want to go out and start making some purchases once you hear more about it. And then to top it off, we've got 2 subject matter experts in the area of collaborative robots, because we do want to talk about, the term that's being thrown around, which is resiliency from a supply chain perspective. And one of the things that we've done is we piloted with 6 Rivers and their collaborative robots to help drive that. So really pleased to have Callie and Salo, Callie from 6 Rivers and Salo from the SCI team as the Senior Manager of Product Development, to share a bit more about what our insights were there. So pleased to have everyone here, and let's do a quick rundown on the agenda. So we'll start off with just a quick update on the insights, as I mentioned, from Mantra. We'll talk about the fireside chat with Austin and Dwayne around Saysh, and then we'll jump into 6 Rivers. Then we'll top it off at the very end, if we've got some time, just a quick panel discussion around why retailers are maybe being cut out of that direct-to-consumer flow and what can they do about it. So that'll be an interesting topic. We'll just see how the time goes. A couple quick things. We will have a poll halfway through. We're curious about what your thoughts are on your biggest concerns around peak. We've got a couple handouts at the end just to cover off some of the topics. And again, on the right-hand side. You can pose questions in your chat and we'll take a look to see if we can answer them as they come up. So without further ado, let me bring up our first subject matter expert. Mamta is, again, I mentioned, from Canada Post, and she's going to share with you insights around that Canadian and that US consumer and how it all fits together. So Mamta, over to you.
So pleased to be here with everyone. And so like Dave mentioned, we're going to really dig in today with some key things around what's happening in the e-commerce landscape. What does that mean in terms of what shoppers are looking for? How and what are they buying, to kind of give you an indication of where their interests lie and where their spend lies. And most importantly, what can you as a merchant do to capture their attention and capture more of their share of wallet? So we're hoping at the end of kind of these 15 minutes, we're able to give you a bit of insight on how we can help guide your business, not only make decisions domestically, but also from a cross-border sales perspective. So if we dive right in and kind of take a step back and look at what retail e-commerce sales has looks like, we saw 75% growth in 2020. I think no surprise to anyone, and our own shopping behaviors kind of probably contributed to that as well. What we are anticipating to see in 2021 is that retail e-commerce sales will get to 86.5 billion, which is almost double the total amount of sales we saw in 2019. So we are starting at a point where we are much further ahead, as Dave said, than we thought we were going to be. And what that really means is, where do we go from here, and where do our shoppers go from here? So we conducted a research study at the beginning, of quarter two in the spring, and talked to 5,000 Canadian online shoppers to really get a sense of exactly that. What are their feelings as they've kind of gone through the pandemic, and where do they really see themselves in terms of behavior-wise, some of those habits that they adopt sticking, and where do they think that they might revert back when things kind of continue to get back to that normalcy? No surprise, Canadians are shopping more. They are looking at really around how much and we've looked at how much they have spent. So really 89% of them have said that we are looking to kind of either maintain or increase the amount of spend we are doing online. Internationally, the interesting thing is we've actually seen a decline from Canadian online shoppers buying from the US. It's gone from 64 to 56% when we compare 2019 to 2021. But there is good news even when we think about a decrease. So we have seen that of those percentage of Canadian shoppers who are purchasing from the US, they've actually purchased more. So we have seen that the average number of orders that they're actually making from the US has almost doubled from 5 to 9. So it's promising to be able to say that while we've seen less shoppers that are Canadian shop from the US, we're actually seeing them purchase more. And 70% of them are actually saying that they plan on maintaining or continuing to increase the amount that they are going to be purchasing. When we think about who those shoppers are, they're really made up from a demographic perspective of individuals living in urban areas at about 41%, suburban areas at 39%, and about 20% in rural and small towns across the country. Their households are really made up of couples with kids, couples without, and those living alone. But the really most interesting fact is from the newest generation of online shoppers. So Gen Z are heavy cross-border shoppers. Well, we have seen 73% actually buy from the US, and that's compared to 64% of total Canadian shoppers. So when we look at not only who they are, but what they're buying, the interesting thing is that from a 2019 to 2021 perspective, we actually haven't seen that big of a shift in the top 5 categories that they're buying from. We've seen some slight increases, pre and post pandemic, when we look at a couple of the categories, and that kind of is understandable because the number of purchases have gone up. But what we have seen is a consistency, whether that is domestic or US purchases from the US, across clothing and apparel, books, computer and electronics, footwear and beauty products, still being consistently the top 5 categories that Canadian online shoppers are purchasing from. And among those shoppers that are purchasing from the US, 20% of them actually fall within what we would consider frequent shoppers. So that's about 7 to 12 purchases a year, where right after that, we see power and hyper shoppers, which really range from 13 to 40 purchases. So we're talking about an audience here that is very sophisticated from an online shopping perspective. They have a great deal of share of wallet for you as a retailer to gain from. And now it's really about how are you going to grab their attention? Because at the end of the day, that is what's going to kind of draw them into your brand. The interesting thing is being unique and standing out and either having a value proposition or an offering seems to be what's doing it. Based on what we've heard from the study, Canadian consumers are really thinking and behaving a bit differently. So while they're shopping more, they're actually expanding who they're shopping with. So we have seen more than 1/3 of Canadian shoppers really looking for a larger variety of retailers. And that actually, interestingly enough, is not just from big and well-known mass merchants. 34% are actively looking to purchase less from mass merchants and subsequently supporting either smaller or more niche type of retailers that really are offering a much more unique product or have something to stand for, something to say that is really driving those retailers, those consumers into those retailers. The biggest thing that we've actually also seen become a bigger priority from a Canadian consumer perspective is the environmental impact that their shopping behavior is having and how those kind of impact their decisions going forward. So 37%, interestingly enough, said that they would shop more from retailers who are more likely to reduce their carbon footprint. 36% for those who actually are involved or stand for an environmental cause, and 32% that really look for that retailer to be partnered with a delivery company that is, focused on lowering their carbon footprint as well. As Dave mentioned, you're going to hear shortly from, Dwayne and Austin, who talk about a D2c selling model. And it's really a perfect example of how to attract, connect, and really retain shoppers who are looking for something that is a little less, typical or something that is a little bit more outside of the norm. And so it'll be interesting to hear their perspective from a retailer's point of view. But now when, a Canadian shopper has actually looked across the plethora of stores that they have at their disposal, the marketing efforts that you do are really what's going to help them discover your brand. And so we've seen that, what they're responding to in terms of the variety of channels really ranges from a physical and digital perspective, but it is all rooted in kind of raising brand awareness and driving traffic to their store. Really kind of surprising to us a little bit, but I think given the times that we're in, the biggest advocates for current shopper have been current shoppers. So we see that just under half are still relying on word of mouth to kind of validate, find, and kind of check out new and unfamiliar brands that really catch their attention because they are trusting that there's individuals who have already been shopping with that brand. So that element of loyalty kind of consistently has to go through because it's actually going to get to your acquisition and kind of come full circle. Web search is obviously still quite high at 33%. And even with e-commerce booming, we see that in-store advertising is still having a really big effect on drawing retailers to a new shopper. And over 1/4 have stated that this is still a top way for them to kind of get acquainted with and exposed to a new brand. When we think about going kind of into the home, we think about TV, but also things like the mail, flyers and direct mail, and then of course social media content that are really rounding out the way that individuals discover brands. But as we kind of look ahead as to where shoppers are going to lie and where they are going to put their spend, it's really around making sure that your marketing strategies are focusing on driving consumers to giving them a strong reason to buy, having front and center what you stand for and what your product offers and what solution kind of you're bringing to them. And whether that's reaching prospects or engaging loyal customers, really actually going to help make or break the sale at the end of the day. And now, we've kind of gone through this cycle of figuring out where that shopper is headed and where they're going from a discovery perspective. But now actually what's going to make them hit buy, what's going to make them actually convert and turn into a customer for you. When we deep dive into why a shopper chooses one business over another, key themes kind of come out. They have been consistent for quite a bit of time, but I think now more prevalent than ever when a Canadian online shopper is making a decision. So cost of shipping, speed, and transparency when it comes to delivery and returns are fundamental in terms of why a Canadian shopper would choose a retailer. When we think about affordable shipping, of course, everyone leans towards free because it's still the top factor. But at the end of the day, balancing cost and speed is really what's going to meet the expectations of a shopper and the preferences that they have. From a delivery timeline perspective, it's still influential, but it really comes down to managing their expectations. 68% say that they're really going to choose a retailer that manages their expectations from end to end, and that comes down to visibility and really having that kind of critical element of upfront and transparent communication. When we think about returns, it's easy to kind of underestimate the impact that it can have on a Canadian shopper. It's really not just about free, it's about simple as well. So we say that, while 61% of shoppers choose a retailer because of free returns, 44 value a flexible return policy, and 56% actually value easy returns. So having options and having choices for your consumers is really what's going to help you stand out and make sure that you're giving them not only that choice, but that flexibility within the range of what they do, whether that's extending timelines, having it be in the mail or in store. It's all about kind of presenting something to them that obviously doesn't impact your bottom line to the extent that you're giving things away, whether that's on the shipping or returns front, but managing and balancing the expectations of really what a consumer is looking for. And at the end of the day, as a retailer, you're looking to win business. That's your ultimate goal. What we really kind of pride ourselves on is making sure that it's not just about the front end, it's really around the back end operations that will make or break the receiving experience and that final kind of mile that a customer is going to experience with your brand. So when we think about, packaging and processing and fulfillment, those key three pieces are really going to, at the end of the day, help you deliver a consistent customer experience, but also make sure that the expectations of those shoppers are met. So really quickly, when we talk about environmental packaging, we really are looking at, what makes a consumer tick. 63% have said that it actually upsets them when a retailer uses excessive packaging or unnecessary packaging. So we've all received the one pack of pens in a massive box, which is really frowned upon. And when we kind of dive into order processing, yes, we know everyone wants things quickly, but it's really, again, how you manage those incoming orders to make sure that quick, between fulfillment and your shipping is really helping them understand what is going to happen between the time they hit buy and the time that they receive it at their door. 44% actually say that the time it takes to process orders before shipping, if that's too long, it's a reason for them not to buy again. So when we think about building loyalty and actually kind of going through, we want to make sure that these kind of things are being consistent. And that, at the end of the day, really gets to streamlining the back end fulfillment, making sure that a customer is really understanding that what you are going to say to them is based on what you can actually deliver on. So you have an organized, well thought out fulfillment and shipping order processing system that's going to enable you to deliver time and time again. These kind of pieces are really what we think go into building a fundamental kind of, whether that be a domestic strategy, whether that be dipping your toe from an international perspective. I think we know that this is becoming table stakes as part of the offering. So 3 tips that we like to give, retailers around cross-border and really expanding their strategy is 1, communicating clearly. This really leads to displaying the price in the right kind of currency upfront, making sure that any duties and taxes are specifically mentioned, because no one wants to be surprised at the end of the day, to make sure that they know what the actual cost of their product is going to be. delivering a positive receiving experience. So like we just talked about, making sure that there are choices based on the delivery partner that you have selected, whether that comes to shipping or whether that comes to delivering their package. And lastly, of course, the returns policy. So while none of us really wants to see returns, we want to make sure that it's simple and clear and flexible for consumers. And, you know, when we really kind of sum this up and make it all kind of, what could this be for you? It's really around how you package the end-to-end story, how you package your end-to-end operations, and really make sure that you're delivering time and time again for customers. So we've crammed in a lot in 15 minutes. So hopefully, you know, there's more resources available to you that you can kind of go and learn more about this. But we hope that these insights kind of help you along your way.
Thanks so much, Mamta. That was great. There was a couple things I really hit home for me. One was your slide that talked about, you know, you said cost of shipping. I call it free shipping, free and easy returns, speed of delivery, and expected delivery date provided. I can tell you that most of the customers we talk to, as well as a sample group of one, which is me, I almost expect those to be minimum standards now. So in other words, if I find an online experience that doesn't hit all four of those, I just jump and I go someplace else. So it's interesting because for me, those are probably the top four criteria when I make a decision. Even if I'm buying from Amazon, I don't buy from a marketplace because of some of those reasons. So it's,
Exactly.
I think you hit home there. The other one that really resonated for me was your comment around niche brands, and we're going to see it next in a minute. But
Yes.
Most of our conversations with you know, new clients have been these niche brands, and it seems like they've really, you know, they've really come to a place where, you know, D2C has allowed them to take advantage of working directly with customers that they couldn't before. So loved your slide around that as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah, thanks so much. I know
Thank
we've got a
you.
couple questions that came in, Mamta, so I think we're going to jump ahead, but I would like to come back to them at the end, and maybe it'll give you a chance just to think through the one that came in from
Absolutely.
Gary and Emily. Okay, thanks again.
Okay, thanks
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
So as we jump into the next session, I just want to take 30 seconds, let you know that we're just about to run a quick poll. And it's a great poll for this time of year. And it's really asking you, you know, what are the biggest pain points that you are expecting or that you're feeling as we head into peak? We've kind of grabbed what we think are the 5 in particular. So we won't stop as you do it. It'll take just a few seconds, but again, right over here, just click on the poll and share with us your thoughts. Love to see, you know, what your answers are. It's a much different peak than we've had in the past, so we'll bring that back up right at the end of Dwayne and Austin and share with you what the results were. So in the meantime, with great pleasure, wanted to bring up to the stage Austin and Dwayne. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves, but from a high level, I mentioned earlier, Dwayne drives sales for SCI, and Austin leads up supply chain for Saysh, and we'll share exactly, you know, what that means and who Saysh is. But from a high level, this is just a perfect illustration of an organization that was thinking North American when they built their distribution strategy and how it's benefiting them. So I'll hand it over to you, Dwayne, to take the lead, and let's see if we can share some insights. Yep. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. And you know, I think you know, the session earlier kind of hit it around niche brands, and I had the pleasure of meeting Austin and Saysh about 18 months ago. And it's true, you know, I'm going to ask Austin some interesting questions around how this came about and let them kind of tell the story. And Austin, I truly thank you for this opportunity. It's been a fun journey for the past 18 months, and based on what you guys are doing, it should be exciting from here on in. So the first question is for the audience, who is Saysh? I mean, what do you do? Maybe you can give the audience some good background on
Yeah,
that.
definitely. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today, Dwayne. So Saysh is a community-centered lifestyle brand for and by women. We have two current products. The first being the Saysh One, which is a lifestyle sneaker specifically designed for women. And the second is the Saysh Collective, which is an online community platform built to uplift and inspire women.
So who founded the, who's the founder, or give me some background on the founder?
Yeah, definitely. Saysh is founded by our president, Allison Felix, which if that name sounds familiar, it should, because Allison is the most decorated US track and field Olympian of all time. She just broke that record this year in Tokyo by getting 2 more medals and surpassing Carl Lewis for that title. And then also we have her business partner, brother, our CEO, Wes Felix, and family friend, CFO, Darren Breedfeld, who are the co-founders as well.
Right. And where did the concept around footwear, where did that all come about? Obviously there's some shoes here on the slide. So where did that all come from?
Yeah, definitely. This all started back in 2018. During her pregnancy, Allison was faced with a gender injustice that she just couldn't run from. Her then sponsor didn't fully support her motherhood by offering up a 70% cut in pay if Allison could not hit performance standards directly after giving birth to her daughter, Cammie. She was told to know her place and pretty much choose from being a professional and a mother. So Allison felt that no woman should have to choose between being a professional and being a mother. As a result, Saysh was born.
So Allison comes up with a couple of business partners, comes up with a footwear brand. Obviously we were introduced at that point. You are a US based company, and all of a sudden you put a distribution center in Vancouver, Canada. Maybe you can give the group some insight, because that really was the step one in the North American distribution model.
Yeah, definitely. Every company is faced with reducing costs in their supply chain. Getting goods to customers duty and tax free via 321 has allowed us to reduce our import costs by roughly 17%. And that's just a huge number that you can either take straight to your margin, or you can also lower your price point on your goods and let the customers actually see a benefit of this. So just made the decision to fulfill out of Canada, cross-border, pretty simple for us.
Right. And where was your, from an origin perspective, how did you pick where you wanted to manufacture? That tie into the North American model at all, or did you just pick XYZ country, or did you do some research on that before you kind of?
Yeah, we definitely did some research. So there are some Asian countries that do have the benefit of a free trade agreement with Canada. Vietnam is one of those. So that helped us choose Vietnam as the origin country.
Great. And from what's the mix, right? Like, so you launched the product, heavily weighted on D2C, I assume, and how does that mix work? Because, I think there's always this notion of, we got to have retail, we got to have wholesale, we got to have e-com, we got to have marketplace. What's the strategy behind Saysh, and what you can share, obviously, around how you're going to push product?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. As a DTC brand, we feel strongly with being heavily penetrated in the DTC market. Currently, we're probably 95% DTC. We do have a small partnership with Athleta for their online store to sell the Saysh shoe. We're currently under talks with some other wholesale brands that would love to have Saysh on their shelves. We're just trying to keep that mix. I would say the most we would want to get into the wholesale business would be that 20%. So we would like to stay 80% plus DTC.
Right. And from a DTC, any challenges that you foresee, around, distributing out of Canada? I mean, is there, you've obviously figured out the origin piece. You've figured out, where to put a warehouse, because today you're focused solely on the US distribution right now, correct? So any tips on things to watch out? Because I think there's folks in the audience that I think the free trade agreement or 321, I think it resonates with a lot of people around North American model, but any kind of any tips that people should watch out for when they look at this model?
Yeah, I would say one tip is definitely finding a partner similar to SCI, because SCI has made 320 guided us every step of the way, starting out with connecting us with professional resources to get set up as a non-resident importer, just ensuring that we were compliant for import-export into and out of Canada, and then ending with finding the best freight forwarder to handle the cross-border movement. I think somewhat of a silver lining with the huge supply chain issues that we're having down here in the US, AKA vessels sitting off of the port of Los Angeles for upwards of 3 weeks. We've been able to get goods into your facility because we come through Vancouver. So we've missed that congestion down here in the US and that bottleneck in the US. So that's also kind of a silver lining to the US problem. But I think something that we are challenged with because of the US bottleneck is once you guys cross the border for us, we're then at the mercy of US domestic shipping and finding the best partner, whether it be the big guys, UPS, DHL, FedEx, USPS, kind of pick which one you want to go with, who can really hit the in-transit times that they're promising you, because the last thing you want is to tell a customer you're going to deliver within a set term of days and not be able to hit that transit time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's also probably a function of growth too, right? Because you're, as we went through this journey, trying to figure out where the DC should be, and then also where, how to get the product out of country, which I think we've obviously figured out, and now it's around the final mile in the US. Any pitfalls or anything you do differently in your North American model outside of that piece? Anything else you think you would do differently, I guess? Because once again, people are thinking, okay, I can go to Vietnam, I can come in duty free, my order's under $800, that's all great, but any things you would do differently if you did this all over again?
Yeah, I think the best model, I feel like, for any company is to be bi-coastal. So right now we're with you all in Vancouver, but if we could figure out how many units we needed for East Coast customers, it'd be a big benefit to be able to have a footprint inside the Toronto area. So we could cross over in Buffalo, get to New York, get to Boston, all the way down to Miami within a couple of days. Because currently you cross over in Vancouver into Washington, and it's quite the transit time over to, say, the Northeast or the Southeast at Miami. So I think optimal solution would be being with SCI in a couple different facilities, East and West Coast.
Right. The that makes sense, right? Because we all have no patience when we order something online. We want it quickly, and especially being a new niche brand, and that was talked about in the earlier session. And I guess, what do you think? Like, you guys are a niche brand, D2C, heavily weighted on D2C. I guess the other question becomes, how are you going to? I mean, we all know the big brands in your market, and how are you going to continue to penetrate that market? Or what you can share once again, right? You've obviously figured out distribution, which is great. Come into Vancouver. We might be a little more friendlier in Vancouver than Long Beach. But how are you going to tackle that market? Because that business is
Yeah, definitely. I think the key for us is we're not just a sneaker company. We're not trying to sell more shoes than Nike or Brooks or Adidas or input brand name there. We are really trying to focus on building that platform, that collective group that will help build the equity across gender pay, gender rights. So I think the biggest thing is that collective group. And if we sell some shoes along the way, that'd be great.
Right. I guess the next question would be, so, now you're distributing into the US out of Canada. And when we think bigger, right, because there was a question around global, right? So what's next, right? I guess how are you going to, I guess what countries, or what can you share? What countries do you think you're going to tackle next? And maybe we're talking about a global distribution model, but what does that look like?
It's a great question. And the easiest answer first is what Mamta was describing. It's Canada. So we see Canada, our site visits, Canada was second behind the US for site visits to Saysh.com. So we are going to hopefully open up the domestic Canada marketplace very soon. And then quickly to follow that, we're going to look for some of those major countries abroad, like the UK, to test our international marketplace.
Right. And what about product? You got some sneakers. What's the other products, or what are you thinking about from a tied back into the gender, et cetera? Like, what other products are you going to carry?
Yeah, definitely. We are currently developing other types of footwear styles, but also we're going to have some collaborations with some jewelry providers, a small apparel collective at some point as well, collection, sorry, at some point, but that's it for the time being.
Right. So once again, Austin, I appreciate, giving us some time and to talk about, what Saysh has done on the North American model. And, I think I truly enjoyed the journey for the past 18 months. So thank you for that.
Thanks, guys, and appreciate it. Now, we got a couple questions, Dwayne and Austin, so I wouldn't mind if you could just stay on for a couple minutes, because I think there were two questions that we could probably help answer in the next few minutes. So one was, there's three questions here. One was, can you elaborate on Section 321? And I know that one of the things you've done, Dwayne, is you have a sort of a one-page handout that we're going to give all the attendees towards the end of the session that they can download that explains from an infographic what the Section 321 means. But maybe you could give Emily and probably a few other people just a quick, 30-second update on here's what Section 321 means.
Yeah, I mean, it's, so in its simplistic form, Section 321, free trade, all those names has been around for years. And really what it is allows brands to ship out of Canada into the United States under $800 from the minimus rule. That is in its simplistic form. So for any of you in the audience that are, thinking about this, that is really in its simplistic form.
Right. Like I mentioned, Dwayne's done a nice job with the handout, so we'll make sure we can drop that up anytime, Max, those handouts, if you like, just in case people need to grab it as they go. That'd be good. The second question is two other questions, and one had to do with returns. And I know that's tough. And the question was, how do you deal with being customer friendly from a returns perspective when you just don't have stores in that country or you don't have stores in the domestic market? And my answer was, you just need to find one central point for them to send it to within the country. But I wasn't sure, Dwayne or Austin, that question came from Gary, a great question. I wasn't sure if you had maybe a different perspective on how you could solve for that. And Austin, not trying to put you on the spot, but I'm sure it's on your mind too, because when I think of a brand new brand, especially in footwear, I'm going to order two sizes and I'm going to send back the one that doesn't fit. So any thoughts, guys, that you want to share with Gary?
Yeah, definitely. We have partnered with a company by the name of Happy Returns. And Happy Returns makes it very easy. The customer just logs into our portal and they choose whether to mail it in or to drop it off at what Happy Returns calls a return bar. And the return bar could be your local Staples store, your local FedEx shipping office. There are thousands of these across the state. So you don't need a brick and mortar Saysh store to actually handle the return. And Happy Returns, we're about a 50% or greater return bar utilization. So I think that's the answer, is finding someone like Happy Returns. And there are some other players in the game too, but that's the ideal solution.
Excellent. Thanks, Austin. The last question that we had, it's a bit of a loaded one, considering, Austin, you're sitting beside your 3PL partner, Dwayne. But the question that came from Sam was, do you plan to continue to work with a 3PL as you grow? So just kind of curious what your thoughts are and the pros and cons, or however you'd want to answer that question, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, definitely. I think the 3PLs are the professionals in that space. So we will continue to work with a 3PL, depending upon growth. If we get to 10 years down the road and we have millions of units that we're bringing in, and we have a bigger base of wholesale partners that need shipments into the US, then we would look at that. But current plan is for sure to stick with SCI and a 3PL.
Excellent. Austin, Dwayne, again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the insights and all the success at Saysh. Kudos to what you guys are doing. Love the brand. Love what Allison and all the support that she's getting stands for. So I'm glad that we're proud to be partnering with you as well. So thanks again, guys. Appreciate the time you shared with us today.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a bit of a jump over to the other side of sort of the North American supply chain strategy, and that has to do with how do you deal with resiliency in your supply chain. So really pleased to bring up two experts, Salo, who's a senior manager of product development here at SCI, and Callie, who is a solutions executive for Six Rivers. And if you're not sure of who Six Rivers are, I know that Callie will share that with you, but think about collaborative robots. And these two are experts in that e-fulfillment automation area, and are going to share some learnings that we've had, SCI and Six Rivers, as how we leverage collaborative robots to build that resiliency, right? That ability to spike unexpectedly. So over to you guys, Salo and Callie, take it from here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dave. And hello, everyone. Glad to have everyone here. My name is Callie, as Dave mentioned. I'm a solutions executive on the sales team at Six River, which is a collaborative mobile robotics company that we'll talk a little bit more about. And we've been working with SCI, and primarily I've been working with Salo for the past several years, both on the deployment of our solution, but because of the nature of our software-driven robotics, also in the management of the solution in terms of intaking what's changing about SCI's business and then customizing and adapting our solution accordingly. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but before we do, Salo, I'll let you give a quick intro.
Thanks, Callie. Yeah, as Dave and Callie mentioned, my name is Salosin, Senior Manager for Product Development within SCI, with a specialized and focus in automation. So definitely been working with Six Rivers for the last, 16 to 18 months more in depth, since we have multiple sites and cobots in our facilities, but much more in advance in terms of how we got here is what Callie and I will be sharing with you guys.
Yeah, so we're going to share ways to build a resilient supply chain. And McKinsey conducted a study of 60 supply chain executives, 93% of whom said they plan to take steps to make their supply chains more resilient. And when we talk about this concept of resilience, I think we could all agree that, sure, that sounds like a good thing. There's no one that's going to argue that you shouldn't have a resilient supply chain. But I think the challenge comes in, how do you actually execute on that? How do you develop a resilient supply chain to be able to adapt to the changing consumer preferences and behaviors that Mamta walked us through, and maybe specific to particular geographies? So the way we've done that is focused on the 3 points you see here. And we're going to take you through specific stories on each. But first, building a digitally supported workforce. Second, making sure you're building flexibility into your supply chain, and then focusing on agility as well. So Salo and I are going to share some examples of, in our work together, how we've been able to achieve resilience with a focus on those three elements. And Salo, as the automation lead person on the ground, using the system, implementing automation for SCI, and doing all the data analysis and understanding in terms of how your business is changing, why don't you kick us off with what made SCI decide to invest in flexible automation, and why, and what benefits, expected or unexpected, have you gained from that?
Yeah, so I guess to start off, trying to be resilient, trying to be agile, you really got to set your mindset that you're ready for change. You're expecting to try new things. So some of the challenges that SCI had faced, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well, is labor retention and shortages. So when we were looking at that challenge in particular, we said, okay, how do we try to maintain and increase productivity, but still address that main concern? So that's when we kind of partnered and started looking into collaborative robots, or what everyone refers to as cobots these days, and met with 6 Rivers. So we noticed that instead of burning out our employees and trying to ask them to do more, how can we bring something to complement their everyday work style to still be able to be willing and wanting to come into work the next day, but then still for us to achieve the throughputs that we want. So when we introduced cobots, we noticed that we have now taken away the elements of pushing and pulling manual cards. We have removed the element of always having in your hand an RF device with the UI screens that are attached to these cobots. And one of the other challenges is the fact of retention and shortage from a labor standpoint. Being able to bring someone from outdoors into our facility and having them trained on cobots, we were able to actually reduce their training and learning curves and have them be so much more efficient from a ramp up standpoint in almost under 3 hours. And we were getting associates and employees that were hitting 80% of our what would be our picking productivity targets before even before the end of their first day of work. So it just goes to show that as you're kind of trying to be a little bit more resilient, be a little bit more agile, flexible, introducing new things into your workforce that are not necessarily going to try to replace a human element, but rather complement it, it goes a long way.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned kind of the impact on turnover and retention, because I feel like we see all these studies that say, you know, businesses invest in your people. That's what you need to do. But and it makes sense. But in this case, it sounds like you have very clear kind of data points that you can correlate to, you know, making the people happier and allowing them to be more productive and giving them an easier job is actually correlating to lower training costs and time and higher retention and things like that.
Exactly.
All right. So moving on to our second story. So in terms of how our system works, we have these collaborative robotics, which are by design flexible. There's no infrastructure required, but it goes beyond that. And Salo and I have talked about sort of balancing the priorities, in that it seems like many people are focused on productivity, but in fact, both of our companies feel like flexibility is on equal grounds with that. And so our system is software driven, which means that over the course of time, we can adjust and customize our algorithms to meet the needs of our customers. So without getting too in the weeds here, I'll just lay some context for this particular use case, and that has to do with our grouping algorithm. So at the time of induct or cart build, our system will look across the entire available order pool and assign the densest set of work to the robot. And so that's factoring in things like SKU, aisle, and bin affinity. So grouping like orders together with the goal of maxing out the cube of the robot, and then also factoring in cutoff times and prioritization that SCI has. And in this case, after we deployed our system, as SCI's order profile was changing around a little bit, we thought maybe there's something we can analyze and tweak on 6 Rivers algorithm to actually customize it to SCI and increase productivity. And Salo, I know you remember this, but it made me a little nervous to think like, okay, the specific piece we're talking about is bin biasing, which is irrelevant, but we increased that, and SCI said, let's try it, and we noticed the productivity went up. And then we increased it again, and it went up again. And then, we increased it enough until it went down a little bit. And then we were like, okay, here's the precise point where this bin biasing piece of our algorithm needs to be. But it was through that trial and error and focus on flexibility and then ability to make those changes with a software-driven system that we were able to increase productivity by 60% just through kind of tweaking around and playing around with that data analysis and algorithm change.
Exactly. And I think, I guess to simply put it, it's almost about pushing the limits, right? So there's always a little bit of hesitancy in regards to, well, we don't know if that's the right approach or if that's the right metric or parameter you're supposed to push it to. But with the partnership that we had and with the excellent customer success team that you guys have that work along with the operations team on a daily basis, because essentially we were monitoring productivity, throughput, and what we are achieving on a day-by-day basis and trying to obviously better ourselves from the day before. So it was good to kind of work with you guys in the sense of, I think we started at 4 from a bin biasing standpoint, and we were going in increments of 4 or 5 almost every other day all the way up to 35 to know that, hey, you know what, maybe we kind of pushed it too much. Let's bring it back down. And I think the sweet spot landed in around 23, which was like super optimal for us. And that just ties back into the flexibility piece of how we can actually gauge, analyze the data, work with the team to really push and be willing to really live with some of the consequences if we are kind of pushing to the max, but then finally to understand that, hey, you know what, this is the sweet spot that we want. And then the last piece that I wanted to talk about was, even from a flexibility standpoint, you can never tell with today's market in regards to how the volumes are going to change. The customers are always going to give you forecasts, but we know exactly how accurate forecasts really are. So having the flexibility to flex up or down, even the total number of cobots that you want, or even having multiple sites that have cobots, for example, and just easily transitioning and transferring them from one site to the other is really what is key, and one thing that we truly appreciate about the partnership.
Yeah, you don't have that infrastructure bolting things down, causing huge kind of cost and time if you want to make a quick change when, you know, consumer behavior changes, and as a result, operations have to.
Exactly.
As Mamta explained for us. All makes sense. And I think your point about the data collaboration analysis is relevant there as well. That wouldn't have been able to work if we hadn't had both teams with a lot of data visibility and kind of focus on tracking and analyzing and tweaking accordingly. So makes sense.
Perfect. And just to kind of jump into, I know we were talking about a digital warehouse, we're talking about flexibility, resiliency. Now when we're trying to talk about agile, I think it's really key to kind of hit this in terms of how can we really design in operations to be agile. And I think we learned this firsthand with the pandemic. We noticed that the shopping trends were changing. You have your traditional brick and mortar, and then you have your traditional e-com orders. But then we noticed that the brick and mortar was kind of changing slightly to what we were considering and calling click and collect. So click and collect in a nutshell is you order online, but then you are doing curbside pickup to go retrieve your orders. And we noticed that this was an additional function or feature that we can take advantage of with the cobots. And how we thought was that by adding more orders to our order pool, we're now giving ourselves a greater efficiency or greater chance of even going back to bin biasing to give us the least amount of footprint that we would need to travel in order to get the maximum throughput. So we noticed that by combining click and collect and your traditional e-com orders, Six Rivers really helped us in terms of expediting that, for us to be able to set up a segregated drop-off zone that the cobots would actually stop at, so that you have your traditional drop-off zones for e-com orders and then the new drop-off zones for click and collect orders, just helping us to kind of think on our feet and to kind of adapt with how the world within supply chain is moving towards.
Yeah, and I think that relates to two things that have come up. And first is kind of taking the human out of it to allow them to focus on more interesting or productive tasks. So that's no longer a person sorting out, you know, click and collect versus e-com orders. You know, the robot's sorting itself and dropping off at a different location. And then also what Mamta talked about around speed of delivery. So if that's one of the main things that people care about, anything you can do to expedite the process and the operations and get the right orders out to the right people faster is ultimately revenue producing for you as a company.
Agreed. And I think the one last piece that I would like to add is we went live with this initiative and this automation almost at the height of the pandemic, right? And talking about being agile, we noticed that the borders between the US and Canada were pretty much closed. So trying to have deployment engineers, trying to have additional support to have from the US over to Canada to help with the implementation was tough. But being able to work with such a great remote team that was able to assess and guide us in how we were able to set up the cobots and be successful was tremendous.
Yeah, and I think that really comes from kind of a software-driven solution. Obviously, it's manifested in this hardware, as you can see in the picture here, but the majority of the solution is software-driven, and that allows the deployments to be quick and primarily remote, with maybe someone on site to assemble the bots and get it started. So those are our 3 stories for the group here in terms of, you know, agility, flexibility, and building a digitally supportive workforce, and how that allows SCI to be resilient. And hope that was interesting. We'll turn it back over to you, Dave, to wrap up here.
Yeah. Thanks, Callie and Salo. That was excellent. And I can remember when we went live with them with that particular client. I remember talking to one of the DC operators that were running the robot, and I asked, what did you think about it? And it was interesting as comment. He said, you know what? I'm so excited when I went home and told my kids that I was working with a robot. So if you think about it, not only is it, from your perspective, you can bring the productivity up so fast with new hires during peak time. I just think it's also a different experience for those workers when they do go home and describe to their kids what did they do that day. Anyway, it ties into, love what you shared. It ties directly into a couple things. You were chatting, but I did want to share with you the results from the poll. What challenges are you facing with the upcoming peak season? This is a really unique peak season. The number one challenge is labor challenge. Not unique to this peak because, we often say from a 3PL perspective, our HR team is probably the biggest part of our organization to get that in place. But I love what you had shared around the resiliency is using collaborative robots to tie exactly into that issue for labor challenges. And how do you address that? I can't think of a better way to address those labor challenges outside of higher wages and more people. So appreciate what you covered off there. There was one question in particular that I thought was a good question, and maybe, Salo or Callie, one of you can take it. And I'm sure it comes to people's minds, which is there a way to make automation a worthwhile investment if we only need it during peak? I remember when I was leading a fulfillment operation from an e-commerce perspective, there definitely was a whole PTL system that I would have to shut down 8 months of the year. So maybe in a minute or two, you could share how do you deal with these investments that you're describing when you're only going to use them in November and December? Salo, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, let me take a stab at this, and then Callie, if you have anything to add, you can definitely chime in. So I think for us, and speaking more specific to the cobots, the beauty is you can still have enough cobots in your fleet from January to October, but then when it comes to peak season, what we were offered, at least with Six Rivers, is seasonal rentals. So specifically for those 2 months or those 6 weeks in the year, you can kind of ramp up, and this ties back into that scalability piece and flexible piece that I was talking about. You can kind of ramp up the total number of cobots that you need to accommodate for that year's peak volumes, and then you can kind of ramp back down to your January, February volumes once the peak is over.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and ties back into the flexibility that we talked about. So many of our customers have 2, 3, 4, 5x increase for Black Friday, Cyber Monday to January 1 or something. And it just doesn't make sense for them to have a solution that can support that capacity all year round. So I would echo what Salo said. And that's just kind of the beauty of the flexibility around flex up when you need to, and then flex back down to meet your capacity.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Callie and Salo. Appreciate what you shared. And for those folks, if you go to the handout section, there is a handout that gives you a bit more detail around what Callie's organization offers. And thank you, Callie, for even sponsoring today's event. Really appreciate it from SCI and for all those people attending. A great handout. You should download it and take a look at all the information that's there. And if you want to learn more, both these people can answer your questions. So thanks again.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to just a quick question that I want to table as we wind things up today. And want to table, we'll bring up a couple more people, but maybe jump to the next slide, and I'll give you some context as we bring a couple more people up to the stage. And it's interesting that how do I word it? I'd say that for years, this equation of brands would get their products to consumers by going through retailers. So retailers were really the portal, if you will. Consumers couldn't really buy directly from brands. Well, they could, but it was clunky, and the brands didn't really have the consumers' eyeballs. They didn't have the trust and loyalty, perhaps, and they just did not have the convenience to do what they did today. So, retailers are sort of getting cut out. So the next slide is really the question that I was going to propose to the attendees. I'd love to get feedback from you folks that are live out there, and like to get your thoughts on this as well. And it is, if this is what the equation looks like. So brands would then need retailers to get to consumers. And if that last statement I had is true, which is retailers are kind of getting cut out because brands are becoming very equipped thanks to technology and all the advancements, brands can now go directly to consumers and consumers can buy directly from brands. What is the value that retailers, what's unique that they can bring to this equation so that they do stay relevant and that those stores do have, some real valuable asset that they can offer? So love to see if there's any feedback from the group that's out there. But in the meantime, Austin, it's a great example of a brand that's going direct to a consumer. What are your thoughts with how does a retailer add value to the equation for Saysh?
Yeah, I think for us it's on the tech side and omni-channel. So if Saysh wanted to sign up with Macy's, Target, Nordstrom, we could gather the traffic from all those sites and actually drop ship from SCI straight to the customer that thought they were buying something with Nordstrom. So we don't have to actually ship the goods to a Nordstrom facility. We can gain the site traffic and just drop ship the goods from anywhere.
Yeah, never thought about that. You're right. So you're saying retailers would still have eyeballs and traffic and maybe specific customer archetypes or subsegments that you could get access to quicker, right? So you could get very specific on it. Yeah, a great call out.
Correct.
Mamta, any thoughts there?
I think the only thing I would add to that is it's kind of the idea that goes back to individuals looking for something unique. So I personally am really drawn, if I go into a retail location that carries multiple things, or I go to a website that carries from multiple sellers, and it's not a marketplace, but that's what the retailer offers as, branching out, offering niche products. And to Austin's point, it gets fulfilled by, potentially in a direct way, but you're adding the retailer is bringing that forward as part of their offering. So I think there's an interesting element there that kind of ties together a retailer being able to distinguish themselves, but still giving visibility to some of those direct to consumer brands that really can offer something unique to a shopper that's looking for it.
Got it. Dwayne, any final thoughts on this topic, and then we'll bring the day to the close.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that from a distribution, as 3PLs, our customers are pushing us to run 4, 5, 6 different channels, right? So making sure you got the right technology to make it simple for our folks at the warehouse level. So that'd be my only advice to anybody out there that owns and operates a 3PL or has interaction. It's easy just to say, hey, we're going to bring on Amazon or whatever. But you got to make sure you got the technology to make it simple at the ground level.
Yeah, so true. Excellent. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate Austin, Dwayne, and Mamta. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thank you very much for everyone's attendance and involvement. And you could see how many people jumped on, and you guys have stayed engaged the whole time. So I know for the presenters and myself, really appreciate it. Appreciate the engagement and the questions.